The most protected man in Seoul was almost killed inside his own house. Not in a dark alley. Not in a public war. But in the silence of his private estate, surrounded by trained bodyguards who were paid to never fail. And they did. The gun was already raised. The betrayal already unfolding. But the person who stopped it wasn't armed security. It wasn't his right-hand man. It was the quiet maid no one noticed. The woman who cleaned his floors. The woman who memorized everything. And in the 1 second that mattered, she reached into his pocket and changed the outcome of his life forever. Chairman Kang Min-jae did not believe in coincidence. In his world, power was engineered, loyalty was tested, and betrayal was always rehearsed before it happened. His estate sat high above the Han River, hidden behind iron gates and surveillance systems imported from 3 different countries. Cameras covered every blind spot. Guards rotated every 4 hours. Every vehicle entering the compound was scanned. Nothing moved without permission. That was how a man survived at the top of Seoul's most powerful syndicate. Inside the estate, silence carried weight. Marble floors reflected chandelier light. The air smelled faintly of cedarwood and polished steel. Bodyguards lined the corridors like statues in tailored black suits, earpieces fitted, hands folded in disciplined readiness. They were trained to anticipate threats before they formed. At least, that was the illusion. In the middle of this fortress moved a woman no one studied closely. Her name was Han Soo-yeon. She wore a simple gray uniform, hair tied neatly at the nape of her neck, hands steady as she dusted expensive surfaces that did not belong to her world. She arrived before sunrise. She left after midnight. She spoke only when spoken to. To the guards, she was invisible background movement. To the staff, she was just the maid. But Soo-yeon noticed everything. She noticed which guard checked his phone too often, which hallway camera flickered for half a second before resetting, which driver parked 2 inches closer to the main entrance than usual. She noticed patterns, and patterns told stories. On that particular evening, the atmosphere felt wrong. Not loud, not chaotic, just slightly off balance. Chairman Kang was hosting a private strategy meeting in his study. Only 4 bodyguards were allowed inside the inner wing. Too controlled. Too tight. Soo-yeon carried a tray of tea down the corridor, her footsteps quiet against the polished floor. As she passed the study door, she heard something she had never heard before. A hesitation. A shuffle. A sharp inhale that did not belong to the chairman. The door opened abruptly. One of the inner guards stepped back too quickly. His hand was not resting in discipline. It was trembling. Inside the study, Chairman Kang stood near his desk, composed but still. Across from him, another guard had shifted position, subtly but deliberately, blocking the only clear exit. Soo-yeon's eyes dropped for half a second. She saw the reflection in the glass cabinet behind them. Metal. Raised. A weapon. And in that silent, suspended moment, she understood something the security team had missed. The bodyguards had already failed. Soo-yeon did not gasp. She did not drop the tray. Panic was loud, and loud people died first. Instead, she shifted her weight slightly, allowing the porcelain cups to rattle just enough to justify her pause at the doorway. The study smelled faintly of ink and aged wood. Chairman Kang's expression was unreadable, but his eyes were alert, calculating angles the way a chess master studies the board before sacrificing a piece. The guard nearest the chairman, Lee Jun, promoted only 6 months ago, had his hand too close to his jacket seam. Too tense. Too ready. In the reflection of the glass cabinet, Soo-yeon saw it clearly now. The polished black edge of a compact pistol angled upward, not yet aimed, but preparing. The other guard by the exit shifted his stance again, widening his feet. Blocking. Coordinated. This was not impulsive betrayal. This was planned. Soo-yeon stepped inside. "Chairman, your tea," she said softly, her voice neutral, almost apologetic for interrupting men with power. The tremble in Lee Jun's fingers increased. He hadn't accounted for an audience. Chairman Kang's gaze flickered to Soo-yun for a fraction of a second. Not confusion, but recognition. He saw that she had seen. The man by the exit made his move first. "Chairman, we need to discuss something urgent," he began, voice too tight. Lee Jun's jacket shifted. The weapon was halfway out. Soo-yun let the tray slip. Porcelain shattered violently across the marble floor. The sharp crack echoed like gunfire, startling the room. In that split second of disruption, she lunged, not at the gun, but at the desk. Her hand swept across the polished wood and knocked a heavy crystal paperweight into Lee Jun's wrist. The pistol discharged prematurely, the bullet ricocheting into the ceiling. The chaos erupted. The guard at the exit reached for his weapon, but Chairman Kang moved with frightening precision, overturning his chair and using it as partial shield. Soo-yun's eyes darted to the fallen gun. It had skidded beneath the desk, near the chairman's shoes. She did not hesitate. Dropping to her knees, she crawled through shards of broken porcelain, ignoring the sting against her palms. Her fingers closed around cold metal. Lee Jun was recovering, rage replacing shock. He dove forward. Soo-yun did not aim like a trained assassin. She aimed like someone who understood timing. She fired once, not to kill, but to disable. The shot struck Lee Jun's shoulder, spinning him off balance. The second traitor froze. That was his mistake. Chairman Kang rose behind the overturned chair, retrieved a concealed blade from inside his desk, and closed the distance in 2 controlled steps. The room went silent except for labored breathing. Soo-yun remained on the floor, gun steady, hands no longer shaking. The bodyguards outside rushed in seconds too late. And for the first time in years, Chairman Kang looked at the maid not as background, but as the reason he was still alive. By sunrise, the mansion felt different. Not louder, not chaotic, just colder. Word had already spread through the inner circle. The boss was alive because of a maid. And in a world built on hierarchy, that was humiliation. Han Seo-jun sat at the head of the long obsidian dining table, untouched breakfast before him, a faint bandage visible beneath his collar, where the blade meant for his throat had barely grazed skin. Around him stood the same bodyguards who had sworn loyalty, men who had trained for years, men who had failed in seconds. And, at the far end of the room, stood her. Jaemin. No uniform now. Just a simple black blouse and dark trousers.
Calm.
Invisible again. If someone walked in, they would never guess she had redirected a blade in midair using the object she found in his pocket, the weighted steel lighter he always carried. She had used it as leverage, striking the assassin's wrist, changing the angle just enough for Seo-jun to survive. It wasn't strength. It was timing. Seo-jun finally spoke. "How did you know?" His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Jaemin met his eyes without challenge. Your left guard blinked twice. Silence spread. One of the guards shifted uncomfortably. She continued. He was nervous. And nervous men grip knives too tight. That wasn't something a housemaid was supposed to notice. Seo-jun leaned back slightly, studying her. Not as staff. As a variable. Where did you learn to see like that? He asked. Jaemin didn't hesitate. When you grow up around men who lie for a living, you learn to read breathing patterns. One of the guards stepped forward. Boss, this is absurd. She could be planted. We don't even know her real background. Jaemin didn't react, but Seo-jun did. Slowly he stood. The movement alone silenced the room. You were here, he said calmly to the guard. You were armed. You were trained. You failed. His gaze shifted to Jaemin. She wasn't. The guard lowered his head. Power had shifted, not officially but psychologically. And everyone felt it. Seo-jun walked around the table, stopping in front of Jaemin, close enough to test fear. There was none. From today, he said quietly, you don't clean rooms. A subtle inhale moved through the room. You observe them. The bodyguard stiffened. Jaemin's expression didn't change. That would make me a target, she said evenly. A faint smile touched the corner of Seo-jun's mouth. You already are. He paused. then lowered his voice, so only she could hear. And I don't waste assets. It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't romance. It was recognition. She had saved his life. But more importantly, she had seen what trained men missed. And in a kingdom built on betrayal, sight was more valuable than loyalty. That morning, as security protocols doubled and whispers spread through Seoul's underworld, one truth became clear. The quiet maid was no longer invisible. And someone inside the mansion had just realized their mistake wasn't failing to kill the boss. It was underestimating her. By morning, the mansion no longer felt like a fortress. It felt like a question. Security rotations doubled. Internal access codes were changed. Weapons were reassigned. Every guard was interrogated separately. And yet, the one person Seojun did not question was the maid. Haein returned to her routine as if nothing had happened. She cleaned the hallway outside his private office. She replaced fresh towels in the guest suites. She prepared tea in the kitchen without speaking unless spoken to. But Seojun was watching her now. Closely. That afternoon, he called her into his study. The room was lined with dark wood shelves and glass display cases filled with artifacts from deals long completed and wars long survived. He did not sit. He stood by the window overlooking the courtyard where his men trained. You reached into my pocket, he said calmly. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement. Haein nodded once. Yes. You knew what was inside. I memorized the position of your emergency blade 3 months ago. Silence filled the room. Not tension. Assessment. Why? He asked. She met his gaze without challenge. Because the men assigned to protect you were careless. They rely on formation, not instinct. One of the captains standing near the door stiffened at that. Seojun noticed. So you acted on instinct, he pressed. No, she replied quietly. I acted on observation. That answer changed something in the room. Seojun walked closer, studying her face. There was no arrogance, no fear, no plea for recognition. Only certainty. Observation, he repeated. Then he turned to his captain. Bring him in. The door opened, and one of the injured bodyguards from the night before was dragged into the study. He had been shot in the shoulder during the chaos. Pale, weak, but conscious. Tell me, Seojun said to the man, what you saw. The guard swallowed. 3 shooters, sir. 2 from the east corridor. 1 inside. We responded. Late, Seojun corrected. The guard lowered his eyes. Seojun looked back at Haein. You saw something they didn't. It wasn't a question. Haein hesitated for the first time. Yes. Say it. She inhaled slowly. The shooter inside didn't aim for you first. He aimed for the surveillance monitor. That means he knew our blind spot would last exactly 12 seconds. The captain near the door shifted uncomfortably. Seojun noticed that too. Continue, he said. Which means, Haein added, someone gave him internal timing. The room went still. It wasn't just an assassination attempt. It was betrayal. Seojun's expression did not change. But the air grew colder. If you are wrong, he said softly, you are accusing my men. If I am right, she replied, just as soft, you are already surrounded. That was the moment, Seojun decided. He didn't need loyalty. He had that. He needed clarity. And the quiet maid had just proven she saw what trained soldiers missed. From today, he said calmly, you no longer clean rooms. The captain frowned. Sir? Seojun didn't look at him. His eyes stayed on Haein. You observe my house. A shift in power. Small, but irreversible. And somewhere inside the mansion walls, the real traitor just realized the maid had become dangerous. The change was not announced publicly. In Chairman Kong Min-jae's world, power shifts were never declared. They were felt. The staff sensed it first. Haein no longer carried trays. She no longer moved with cleaning supplies. Instead, she stood still more often, watching, listening, mapping the mansion the way others mapped battlefields. The bodyguards pretended not to notice, but they noticed. Every whisper paused when she entered a corridor. Every earpiece conversation lowered in volume. No one liked being observed by someone who had proven she could see what they missed. Chairman Kong did not sit in his office that afternoon. He walked the estate slowly, hands behind his back, testing the tension in the air. He passed through the training courtyard where men sparred under controlled aggression. He passed the security control room where monitors displayed feeds from every corner of the property. And then he stopped outside the internal server chamber. Hae-in was already there. She wasn't touching anything, just standing in front of the access log terminal. "What are you looking at?" he asked calmly. "Patterns," she replied. He stepped closer. On the screen were timestamps, entry logs,
Camera resets.
guard rotations. "The monitor inside your study glitched for 11 seconds before the attack," she said quietly. "Not 12. His eyes sharpened slightly. "You are certain?" "Yes." She pointed. The reset command originated from this corridor panel, not from central control. That meant someone inside the inner wing manually triggered the blind spot. Someone with clearance. Someone trusted. Chairman Kong did not react outwardly. But inside, pieces aligned. "Who had access?" he asked. Hae-in didn't hesitate. 4 men. He nodded once. "And which one?" blinked twice. A faint pause. Captain Do-hyun. The name settled like smoke. Do-hyun had been with Kong for 5 years. Loyal. Efficient. Silent. The kind of man who never drew attention. That was precisely why he was dangerous. "Bring him," Kong ordered quietly. Minutes later, Captain Do-hyun stood in the study, posture perfect, expression disciplined. "You called for me, Chairman?" Kong circled him slowly. "Tell me," he said softly, "when did you last reset the inner study feed?" Do-hyun's face did not move. "Routine maintenance, sir. 2 days ago." Hae-in spoke from behind Kong. "That's not accurate." Do-hyun's eyes flickered, just slightly, toward her. There it was again. That microsecond hesitation. "You triggered it 11 seconds before the shot," she said evenly. Silence thickened the room. Kong stopped walking. "Explain." Do-hyun's jaw tightened. "Sir, with respect, she is a maid." "Her interpretation." Kong raised one finger. The room froze. "Answer the question." For the first time, Do-hyun's breathing shifted. Not panic. Calculation. And in that calculation, Kong saw the truth. Betrayal was rarely loud. It was procedural. "You underestimated her," Kong said quietly. The statement wasn't to Do-hyun. It was to himself. In one smooth motion, Kong stepped back. 2 guards entered behind Do-hyun, weapons drawn. The captain understood immediately. His composure cracked for the briefest second. That was enough. "Take him," Kong ordered.
No shouting. No spectacle.
Just removal. As the doors closed behind the fallen captain, Kong turned to Hae-in. "You didn't save my life," he said calmly. "You exposed a weakness in my empire." She met his gaze without pride. Weakness spreads when it's ignored. A slow, measured nod. Chairman Kong Min-jae did not smile often. But that afternoon, the faintest curve touched his lips. "Then help me eliminate it." And somewhere beyond the estate walls, word began to circulate. The assassination attempt had failed. The chairman was alive. And the quiet maid who reached into his pocket had just dismantled a captain. The balance of power in Seoul had shifted. Not because of violence, but because someone who was never meant to matter, mattered too much. Captain Do-hyun did not scream when they dragged him to the lower interrogation chamber. He did not beg. That would have been beneath him. Men like him did not collapse loudly. They unraveled quietly. Chairman Kong Min-jae stood behind the reinforced glass panel above the chamber floor, watching with the same composure he used in boardrooms and battlefields. Hae-in stood slightly behind him, hands folded in front of her, posture neutral. She did not look like someone who had just dismantled a senior captain. She looked like she belonged in the shadows. "He won't confess easily," Kong said without turning. "He won't need to," Hae-in replied softly. Kong glanced at her. "You're certain?" She nodded once. Men who believe they are the smartest in the room always leave something unfinished. Below them, Do-hyun sat restrained at a metal table. Across from him sat Kang's intelligence chief, Director Yoon, known for extracting truth without raising his voice. The room remained quiet for several minutes.
No shouting. No threats.
Just silence thick enough to press against the lungs. You trained under me, Director Yoon said calmly. You know how this ends. Do-hyun's expression stayed rigid. I have nothing to confess. Kang observed his breathing pattern. Steady, controlled, but slightly elevated on the left side. Hae-in noticed it too. He's still calculating, she murmured. Kang tilted his head slightly. Calculating what? Whether the second plan has already begun. That made Kang's eyes narrow. Second plan? Hae-in stepped closer to the glass. The attack was too precise. The shooter inside your study aimed at the monitor first. That means they wanted blindness, not chaos. If the goal was simple assassination, they would have fired immediately. Kang processed that. You're saying this was only phase 1? Yes, she said quietly. And phase 2 doesn't require him. Below them, Director Yoon slid a tablet across the table. On the screen were financial transfers traced through shell corporations linked to Do-hyun. Offshore accounts. Time deposits. Structured cleanly. Do-hyun's jaw tightened. There. The first crack. Kang did not move. He was not interested in the money. He was interested in structure. Follow the timing, Hae-in said. Kang examined the dates. Payments aligned with security rotation adjustments. With camera upgrades. With staffing changes. He wasn't selling information randomly, Kang murmured. He was engineering access. Hae-in nodded. And someone outside funded it. Do-hyun finally spoke. You think you've won because you caught me?
His voice was calm now.
Almost amused. You're already surrounded. Kang's expression did not shift. By who?
Do-hyun smiled faintly.
By the men you still trust. Silence returned, heavier than before. Kang turned to Hae-in slowly. How many? She didn't hesitate. At least 2 more. Possibly 3. Director Yoon stood. We can isolate the security wing immediately. Kang shook his head slightly. No sudden moves. He looked back at Do-hyun. Let them believe I know nothing. A dangerous stillness filled the observation room. We flushed them out, Kang continued calmly. All of them. His gaze shifted to Hae-in. And you'll help me design it. She held his eyes steadily. No fear.
No pride.
Just clarity. The chairman had survived one betrayal, but now he understood the truth. The attack on his life had not failed. It had only revealed the first layer. And the quiet maid who reached into his pocket had just shown him something more valuable than loyalty. She had shown him the map of hidden enemies. Chairman Kang Min-jae did not retaliate immediately. That was what lesser men did. They reacted. He preferred to rearrange the board before anyone realized a move had been made. By sunset, the estate looked calm again. Guards resumed their formations. Vehicles entered and exited on schedule. Meetings continued as if nothing had fractured beneath the surface. But inside Kang's private office, the air carried calculation. Hae-in stood near the wall-mounted digital security map, her eyes tracing access points and patrol routes. Director Yoon waited silently beside her. Kang remained seated, fingers steepled beneath his chin. If there are at least 2 more, Kang said evenly, they won't move yet. Hae-in nodded. They'll wait to see if Do-hyun talks. He won't, Director Yoon replied. Not willingly. Hae-in's gaze shifted. It doesn't matter. The real traitors won't risk exposure by checking on him directly. Kang's eyes lifted slightly. Then how do they verify? Through disruption, she answered. A systems test. Something small. A shift in surveillance. A breach rehearsal. Silence settled as Kang absorbed the logic. He stood slowly and walked to the window, overlooking the inner courtyard. Guards trained below, unaware they might already be compromised. We give them what they want, Kang decided. A weakness. Director Yoon frowned slightly. Intentionally. Yes. Kong turned back to Heian. Design it. She moved to the table, activating the security interface. Tomorrow night, she began calmly, you'll request a private meeting in the East Wing. The same corridor where the cameras flickered before the last attack. Director Yoon's eyes sharpened. We deactivate them again? Briefly, she confirmed. 8 seconds. Not 12. Kong watched her carefully. Why 8? Because whoever funded the previous timing will expect 12. If they attempt to exploit it again, they'll move too late. A faint shift crossed Kang's expression. Approval. And the inner guard rotations? He asked. Replace 2 of them, Heian replied. Quietly. Not with new faces. With men loyal to Director Yoon. Director Yoon inclined his head. Understood. Kong stepped closer to Heian, lowering his voice. You realize if this fails, you become the most convenient scapegoat. She met his gaze without hesitation. I was already a target the moment I stepped into your study. The honesty in her tone carried no fear. Only acceptance. Kong studied her a moment longer, then gave a single nod. Then we proceed. That night, word subtly spread through the estate. The chairman would hold a private discussion in the East Wing the following evening. Nothing unusual, nothing dramatic. But somewhere within the guarded walls, someone listening too carefully would interpret it as opportunity. And as the sun dipped below the Han River, casting long shadows across the estate, the second layer of betrayal began to shift. This time, however, the trap was not set by the enemies. It was built by the Maid, who had once been invisible. The following evening unfolded with engineered normalcy. At precisely 9:40 p.m., Chairman Kong walked toward the East Wing corridor flanked by 2 guards who had served him for over a decade. Director Yoon remained several steps behind, expression unreadable. The security cameras along the corridor blinked once, then went dark. 8 seconds. No more. No less. To anyone watching remotely, it would appear as a brief glitch.
Routine.
Explainable. Heian stood in the secondary control room, eyes fixed on 3 separate live feeds. She wasn't watching the corridor. She was watching reactions. The men who anticipated 12 seconds would move on the 9th. The impatient ones would adjust too quickly. The guilty would hesitate in the wrong direction. At second 7, she saw it. Guard Captain Seo, positioned at the far stairwell, shifted abruptly, stepping away from his assigned post before the cameras restored. He wasn't supposed to move at all. His right hand brushed his earpiece, but he wasn't transmitting. He was listening. Cameras flickered back on. Kong continued walking, posture calm. Captain Seo had already repositioned himself, but too late. The timing had betrayed him. Heian spoke quietly into the secured channel. Target confirmed. Captain Seo. Initiate containment protocol B. Director Yoon's voice responded instantly.
Copy.
Down the corridor, Seo realized something was wrong the moment 2 guards approached him from both ends. He reached instinctively for his sidearm, but Director Yoon was faster. A sharp strike disarmed him before he could draw. The confrontation was swift and silent. Within seconds, Seo was restrained and escorted into a secured chamber. Chairman Kong did not turn around. He did not raise his voice. He simply continued into the meeting room as if nothing had occurred. That was power. In the control room, Heian exhaled slowly for the first time all evening. One more layer exposed. But her eyes didn't soften. He wasn't the planner, she said quietly. Director Yoon reappeared beside her. You're certain? Yes, she replied. Seo reacted too quickly. He expected 12 seconds. That means someone told him the previous timing. Director Yoon understood immediately. Then there's still another source. Heian nodded. Higher. Director Yoon's gaze sharpened. Internal council level? She didn't answer directly. Instead, she replayed the footage again. Seo's movement hadn't been aggressive. It had been protective of someone else's position. He was covering for someone, she concluded. Inside the secured chamber, Seo finally spoke under pressure. His loyalty fractured not from pain, but from fear. I didn't design it, he insisted. I was told it was necessary. For stability. By who? Director Yoon demanded. CO swallowed. Vice Chairman Park. The name landed heavier than gunfire. Park was not just senior leadership. He was second in command. Trusted for 15 years. Director Yoon stepped out, face hard. He found Kang waiting in the dim hallway. It's Park. Kang's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes cooled completely. Across the estate, unaware he had just been named, Vice Chairman Park prepared for what he believed would be a decisive night. What he didn't know was that the quiet maid had already rewritten the ending. And this time, the board was set for open war. Vice Chairman Park did not panic when the first of his men stopped answering calls. He was too experienced for visible fear. Instead, he adjusted. He canceled the late-night strategy meeting. He ordered his driver to reroute the usual path back to his private residence. He even smiled during a brief call with Chairman Kang, his voice steady, respectful, perfectly measured. But inside the estate, the chessboard had already shifted. Haein stood beside Director Yoon in the private surveillance chamber, watching Park's movements through 3 independent feeds. He knows something, Yoon muttered. Yes, Haein replied. But not everything. Chairman Kang entered the room without announcement. He watched the screens silently. Park stepping into his vehicle. Park checking his watch. Park unaware that every external security gate in the district had already been flagged. We do not confront him publicly, Kang said calmly. Not yet. Haein nodded. If we move now, his external alliances will activate. He will frame this as internal instability. Kang looked at her. So, what do you suggest? She did not hesitate. Let him believe he still controls part of the board. Remove his leverage first. Yoon understood immediately. His financial channel. Haein nodded. And his foreign contact in Busan. Kang studied her carefully. You traced that. 3 weeks ago, she replied evenly. When the supply shipments began arriving 2 days earlier than scheduled. Silence followed. Kang did not ask how she knew. He did not need to. Within 40 minutes, Park's offshore account access was frozen. 2 of his loyal captains were quietly detained. His Busan contact intercepted before departure. When Park arrived at his private residence, he found 3 of Kang's senior men already waiting in the living room.
No shouting.
No drawn weapons. Just stillness. Chairman Kang requests your presence, one of them said politely. Park's composure faltered for half a second. It was enough. Back at the estate, Kang waited in the central hall. When Park entered, their eyes met across polished marble. 15 years of partnership. Years of trust. Years of shared strategy. You built your own exit plan, Kang said calmly. Park exhaled slowly. I built protection. From me? From unpredictability, Park corrected. Haein stood at the side of the hall, silent. Observing. Park's gaze finally shifted to her. Recognition dawned. The maid, he said softly. Kang's voice lowered. She is no longer staff. Park gave a faint, bitter smile. You let an outsider dismantle your command structure.
No, Kang replied.
I let someone who sees clearly remove what loyalty blinded. Park did not beg. He did not deny. He understood the rules of their world. Betrayal had a cost. But before he was escorted away, he spoke one final time. You think this ends tonight? Kang did not respond. Because he knew it did not. And Haein felt it too. Park had not acted alone. He had believed in protection from somewhere else. Somewhere external. The mansion felt colder than before. The first traitor had fallen. The second had been exposed. But the real architect of the assassination attempt still remained unseen. And now, the war was no longer internal. It was expanding beyond the estate walls. Seoul did not wake up knowing a quiet war had just ended before sunrise. Traffic still filled the bridges over the Han River. Businessmen still hurried into glass towers. News channels reported nothing unusual. But inside Chairman Kang Min-jae's estate, the final move had already been made. Vice Chairman Park was gone. Officially, he had stepped down due to health complications. Unofficially, He had been removed from every layer of influence he once controlled. His assets dissolved. His alliances fractured. His protection stripped away one silent decision at a time. But as Hae-in had predicted, Park had not been the architect. He had been a doorway. The real architect revealed himself when intercepted communications traced back to an international broker operating out of Tokyo, a syndicate that wanted Kong destabilized, weakened from within before a takeover attempt. Park had been promised elevation,
Power.
immunity. Instead, he had become the first fallen piece. Chairman Kong stood alone in his study that evening, the same room where the first gun had been raised. The glass cabinet had been replaced. The security grid upgraded again. But what changed most was invisible. Trust had been recalibrated. Hae-in entered quietly. She no longer wore the maid's gray uniform. She stood in tailored black, posture steady, presence composed. She did not bow deeply anymore. Only slightly. Professional. Equal in function, if not in title. The Tokyo broker has retreated, she said calmly. They won't attempt another internal breach soon. Kong nodded once. And Park. Transferred. He understands he will not return. Silence settled between them, but it was not tense. It was reflective. Kong stepped closer to the window, overlooking the city lights. You changed the outcome of this house, he said quietly. Hae-in's voice remained level. I corrected what was already unstable. He turned to face her fully. Why stay? It was the first personal question he had asked. She met his gaze evenly. Because chaos is inefficient, and I prefer order. A faint smile touched his expression, rare, restrained. You are invisible in this house, he said. Now everyone sees you. Hae-in did not flinch. That is their adjustment to make. Outside, the estate gates closed for the night. Inside, the power structure stood stronger than before, not because of force, but because observation had replaced assumption. The quiet maid had not sought power. She had not chased recognition. She had simply stepped forward in the second that mattered. And in doing so, she did not become queen of the empire. She became its compass. The most protected man in Seoul survived because someone no one noticed chose to see what others ignored. And in a world built on betrayal, vision was the most dangerous weapon of all.